that children should not be allowed to read books that are about people like them, because that is somehow more disconcerting and more like rawly upsetting than the idea that a woman's christened name is Pussy Galore.
Welcome to the Skiffy and Fanny Show's new live show, SNF Clacks.
Tonight, we take our shoes off before walking into the metal detector. We redact the redacted from old copies of Redacted, and you ask us to prove that we're human.
I'm Sean.
I'm Brandon.
I'm Paul.
And I'm Trish.
Welcome, Trish. You're here. I don't know why I said welcome to you. I've had a day. Let me just tell you.
The rest of us, Paul, I guess we're not welcome.
You're not welcome. Screw you.
Bye-bye.
So on today's day, we're going to try to discuss a whole bunch of stuff that has been going on in the science fiction, fantasy, horror, broadly geek community, which is the point of this show, which I will note that the title came about because Paul suggested a title that I thought we couldn't do exactly as is because of
Typical Paul.
No, that was not a criticism, Paul. That was Paul had a really cool idea for the title, and then I went, well, we can't do that exact one. And then Brandon was like, what about this other thing? And I was like, cool, we won't get sued if we do that. So we went with that option. And then the idea behind this show is to do current events, things that are happening in the community, interesting conversations and topics. So as always, if you'd like, you can let us know what you think in the chat if you'd like us to cover things. But we're going to cover a whole bunch of stuff, including issues with customs and border protection happening in the science fiction fantasy community, issues of altering works, which has been in the news recently, as well as potentially discussing AI and its effects on genre fiction, and Nebula nominations, and then some questions, some that Brandon has suggested and some that have come to us from our listener suggestion form.
There's a thing that I'm supposed to be doing now.
Yeah, there's a script, but you don't have to follow the script. It's fine.
So, before we get into all of that, a reminder to all of you that now we have a Twitch channel. It's twitch.tv/SkiffyandFanty. We're going to be here doing lots of cool things. One of those cool things is the cool thing that you're looking at right now, which we're going to be doing on a monthly basis. But the other thing is Twitch's Cinema, which now you get to watch live on the channel. I get to watch people react to whatever catastrophes you'll be watching, because I don't join you all for Twitch's Cinema. But the full schedule for these shows is now on the Skiffy and Fanty About page. So if you are interested in seeing more stuff happen live here, if you want to see us, I don't know, play things every once in a while or do more live stuff on this channel, you can let us know. And if you're interested in the stuff that we already make, you can find those things at skiffyandfanty.com, or find the audio versions at on your favorite podcatcher of choice. Because we are somehow coming all the way up to 800 episodes of things.
Yeah. We've been at this since 2010. I mean, you haven't, Brandon, but I have.
Right, yes, I haven't, but I didn't know it was that many. That's actually... So yes, we might do something special for that. I highly doubt it. All of our brains are fried, but we might. So yeah, thank you so very much for your support. I hope that you'll support the live things that we're doing here as well. And please share these cool things with all of your friends who might be interested in watching four nerds get very upset about things.
Today will be one of those, I think.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have more good news in the future. But the one time that we decided to start the Clacks, we opened with some very upsetting news.
So there's the script file, which leads us to Trish, I believe, at this point, because you are H4 in the script. Look, folks at home are learning very quickly that
we're all learning.
Have a script. Yeah, we're
the
all
beauty
learning.
of a live show. The beauty of a live show is all of the stuff that we would cut from the podcast. You have
That's
to
right.
witness us do it.
Yeah, precisely so.
So, listeners, audience, we also want to hear from you. If you're here live or listening at home, please go to skippyandfanty.com/listener suggestions and share your thoughts, questions, and topic suggestions. SNF Clacks, in particular, relies on feedback from our listeners. So, send them in, nerds.
I also just want to note, Paul, that the chat on the Zoom is not private. So
Oh no!
Paul posted in the chat immediately while Trisha's talking, because Paul, you are in fact in the script. I will just note, you're in this script, Dagnerbit. Anyway, there's a whole reason.
I'm having fun.
Okay, good. I
Yes,
just want you to know,
fun
if you
is
post
good.
anything in the chat, everyone can hear it or see it. They won't be. Maybe they can hear it. I don't know. Maybe someone has some sort
You
of.
don't know if somebody in the audience is a synesthete. They might have heard it.
I'm glad we're on the exact same wavelength, Brandon. Thank you, because I was thinking the exact thing. So, okay, so let's get to some topics. So, we've got a whole lot to discuss. Brandon, would you like to take us to our first topic?
Okay, I like how you put this on me. God damn it.
Well, I will just note that I know for a fact you have. I'm not confident in my pronunciation, but I know for a fact you've said his name many times. So I
have
100% am putting it on you for that reason. I don't want to screw it up.
Which is better than screwing it up, to be fair. A couple of this would have been exactly a week ago, if I'm not mistaken. In fact,
it's still
if
kind of
not
happening
longer,
this week. Yeah,
and is still technically ongoing based on the nature of that conversation. On February 25th, right, just under a week ago, poet and writer Woody Dismukes mentioned that days prior, Oghenechovwe Donald Ekpeki had just been detained by Customs and Border Protection in Los Angeles at LAX, on their way. I can't remember if it was to or from an event, and right, it was on their way to. It was on his way to a convention, and at that point, on that Thursday, had not been heard from him for 48 hours and was still under detention. As of right now, we are. Oghenechovwe has actually stated on social media that they have been released. They are presently resolving a matter of issues regarding their visa and the reason why they were detained in the first place. They didn't get to. Unfortunately, were not able to attend the convention as a result. So yeah, that's been a thing for him. It's been a recurring level of issue for Oghenechovwe on a regular basis. Previously, he was
for ShyCon. Yeah, had issues
Right, yes,
getting
this
a
was-
visa for ShyCon. Yeah.
he was struggling to get his visa in time too, but was fortunately enough to be able to have that sorted out in time for ShyCon. Sometime previously, still, he wasn't able to get his visa at all for a previous convention some years prior, if I recall correctly. So this is a thing. This has regularly also been a thing for other African writers dating as far back as Dublin, but is particularly noteworthy in Oghenechovwe's case because he's been nominated for like some of the highest awards on a regular basis in our community, and is still being not only regularly disenfranchised by the state of travel from Africa to the US, but is this recurring incident has also been a flashpoint of harassment for him as well, which is also noteworthy. So yeah, that's a thing that is still happening.
So a couple of pieces of information to add to this. The thing he was going to attend was the NAACP Image Awards ceremony,
Right,
as
yes.
I recall, for which he was nominated as co-editor of Africa Risen, if I got the title correct. He would have been there with many other very important folks. I know Tanana Reeve Dew was on Twitter trying to figure out, also using her platform to amplify to find out what had happened to him, because he had not been heard from. So that this was not like, I mean, like, not to be offensive to like some science fiction awards, but like this wasn't like a tiny ass award that most people haven't heard of, right? This is the NAACP, for fuck's sake. So to me, the big thing that I just thought the whole time was, this is such a big award. Surely why does there not a process to just, like, he's going to this award because he's nominated, here's his name, here's his passport, fucking, like, yeah, he comes in for 3 days and then he leaves, whatever. Like, it just seemed to me odd that it's very clear why he's coming to the United States this time. It's not a secret, it's not a tiny organization. I mean, I don't know. It just seemed very strange. I do want to note too about this before I kind of shut up and let other people jump in. I would be very cautious about rumors and people claiming to have inside knowledge about this. There are a lot of people saying they've got information. Some of them have legitimate information that they've gathered from, like, the itinerary for his flight and things like that. But there are a lot of people claiming they have, like, inside knowledge about his visa and all that stuff. And while some of them might actually have that, I just really want to caution against speculation. There are basically only two parties who really know what happened. One of them is Ekpeki, and one of them is Customs and Border Protection. And they may have very different interpretations of what actually happened. I think that's already clear because Ekpeki has said publicly that the treatment that he experienced while in effectively confinement was dehumanizing, which I think is a totally fair thing. I think the big thing for me that stuck out was just, why did he need to be away from his phone for all those days? Did it take him that long to figure out that he was in violation of his visa? Like, I don't, even if he was like secretly trying to stay in the US against visa rules, like, okay, but then you already probably figured that out pretty quick, so why wouldn't you just give him back his phone so he could let his friends and family know he's okay? I don't understand. It makes no sense to me.
So I will comment on this somewhat externally, somewhat as an aside, as the only person on this panel in this Zoom chat who is not American and therefore has witnessed American Custom and Border Patrol security theater from the outside entering into
Please,
inward.
yeah, please tell us.
The process of entering the United States is almost overwhelmingly hostile. The very first time that I traveled to the US, I was a teenager in the presence of only one adult who also happened to be Black, a Muslim, and very large.
Okay.
Everything that you can imagine that followed from that experience happened.
It's like
anything that you could
trifecta.
guess.
Yeah.
Like
of
anything
all
that
the
you
things
could
they're
guess was the
terrified of.
worry that would immediately, it was not like, it could have been more traumatizing, to be sure, but there is, and I'm sure, like, I'm sure what I witnessed as a result was the bare minimum of the intensity of that level of security theater, because we weren't detained by anyone, for instance. We just went through a lot of random background checks every time we stopped somewhere. But suffice it to say that there is a level of overwhelming fear that is inherent to being in an American airport, such that I have no doubt in my mind that even if it were a minor visa issue, a customs agent went, we are going to treat this like this is a potential active threat. Because if it is an active threat, we need to make sure we can get in front of the active threat. And if it's not, what are we going to do? Inconvenience one Black person? Which is upsetting on its own, because I highly suspect as a result that it wasn't merely that that Oghenechowwe's phone was off or like still on the conveyor belt being scanned, but that it was actively in CBP's possession with the deliberate intention of preventing him from making a phone call.
I mean, that's totally accurate. Yeah, I mean, yeah. There's obviously.
I mean, again, I hesitate to presume much the same as you, because I don't want to slander the CVP. But at the same time,
I mean,
it is very
slander
intense to enter. I mean, yeah, they deserve it, but I also don't want to. I don't want the CIA to come knocking on my front door. Is what I mean.
I mean, I can't speak to being a person of color from a country, like in the case of Ekpeki, who comes from a country where, frankly, there's just higher scrutiny of Nigeria in particular. Whether that's justified is a different question, but there just is. Like, the U.S. is more cautious about Nigeria in particular. Not necessarily entirely for good reasons. I can just speak, like, when I have, like, customs in general is, like, not, it's not like, they're not, like, super friendly. My experience at customs, even as a person who, frankly, is largely privileged in this regard, they're just not friendly. And it just must be, like, levels and scales of increasingly unfriendliness and presumption of you must be up to no good. Which, like, I just find, like, I understand that in the real world there are people up to no good. I get it, but and they probably deal with lots of people where it's one of those things where it just kind of, even if statistically the number of people who are actually up to no good is such a small number, but when you're the only person seeing it all the time, it seems larger. Like, that's a weird phenomenon with statistics where people experience a thing a few times with, like, one group of person, and then they just assume, like, oh, any instance might be one of those, even if statistically the incidence is tiny. And this
Oh, I
happens all
know
the
that
time.
there are Canadians who refuse to come to conventions in America because, I'm sorry, in the United States, because it's such a difficult process now. And, so I'm sure it's magnitudes of higher to harder to get in from any African or Asian or South American country than it is from Canada.
Yeah,
Oh,
indeed.
yeah.
Anybody who does I mean, it's like that Family Guy thing. Yeah, if you're below that color line, then you're automatically a suspect until proven guilty
Yeah.
and not guilty.
Even my wife
I'm-
said she was asked way more questions. She's Vietnamese, so she was asked a lot more questions. She didn't seem to suggest to me that what she got was, like, super hostile, but she was definitely asked much more probing questions than I would know. Like, when I go to Vietnam, like, they ask me nothing. They just look at my passport and just, like, I don't even know if they look at anything. Like, you just, like, hold it for, like, a minute and a half just to make it seem like they're doing something. I realize I've just slagged off the Vietnamese Customs and Border Patrol people, but uh but yeah, so, like, it's just it's a weird thing.
Oh yeah, I was gonna mildly add, I can't remember the author's name. There is a Canadian writer who had an altercation in an American
Peter
airport.
Watts. Peter Watts.
Aha, right.
He was
yes.
pepper sprayed and then banned, I think. I don't
Oh
know
my
if he's
gosh.
unbanned at this point, but yeah.
Right. In December 2009, Watts was detained at the Canada-United States border by U.S. Customs and Border Protection to perform a reportedly random search of the rental vehicle he was driving. Watts is alleged to have assaulted an officer and was turned over to local authorities to face charges. According to an officer, the authorities used pepper spray to subdue Watts after he became aggressive towards officers. According to Watts, he was assaulted, punched in the face, pepper sprayed, and thrown in jail for the night. The officer later admitted in court that he had punched Watts. The jury found Watts guilty of obstructing a U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer. He faced a maximum sentence of 2 years in prison. Watts blogged about his experience, saying that because of how this law was written, his asking, "What is the problem?" was enough to convict him of non-compliance. In April 2010, he was given a suspended sentence and a fine. However, due to immigration laws, Watts' felony conviction prevents him from re-entering the United States. And that's a white man.
Yeah. Yeah, this was like the post 9/11 world, especially. Like, I'm not saying it was great before 9/11, but, like, 9/11 ramped all this shit up pretty hard, which is insane to me. But there is that. So yeah, I mean, like, this whole situation, I'm waiting for more information because I just don't know what really happened at this point. And Ekpeki has a good reason not to speak publicly about exactly what happened, because I think he's got a good reason to reach out to a lawyer, at the very least to just know what would be the appropriate things to, especially, like, it's clear to me that at some point he's going to want to come back to the United States, and, like, speaking publicly could potentially be a problem because the U.S. is, I mean, we love the NSA is fun. It's a fun place. It loves searching people's records. So I think it's a smart move to seek legal advice on what exactly to say in public and what legal recourses are there. I really hope that physically he was okay, even if obviously under a lot of stress. I know that with Watts in particular, like he was pepper sprayed, and I know when I read his blog post, like it was pepper spray is kind of evil. I don't know that it should
Too
actually
much
be
pepper
used.
spray and you can not only lose your sight but lose your eye.
Yeah. I'm not convinced that pepper spray is an appropriate usage in almost any context. I'm not
Fun
convinced.
fact, in official police documents in most states, pepper spray is very rightly identified as lethal.
What is the Scoville rating of pepper spray? Google it,
Not
Paul.
that high, I'm sure.
But it's
Not
got to be
that
high
high, I'm
enough,
sure.
like
But any
500,000 or
of it,
something?
I mean, anything above 4 figures, I'm sure, is very bad.
Especially in the eyes. Yeah, so I see in the chat that Rainbow Warrior is asking if he's coming to ECFA.
I thought his attendance was last year. I didn't know.
No, it's
I'm
this
not
year.
sure.
He's one of the
right.
guests of honor this year.
Oh, I thought it was last year. But then again,
So-
I don't know when ICFA is. I believe that's in a couple of weeks now, in fact.
The week after next. We're recording on the 3rd, so the week after next, starting on the 15th or 16th, I think. Here's the problem. I don't know if he's going to make it to ICFA because
of this issue.
this
Because of
issue.
this
I'd be very discouraged if I were him. Maybe he will keep trying, but maybe he'll decide to spend his energy on other things.
It's possible. I think, Trish, you're right from a personal perspective. That's completely correct. My big concern is it seems to me that based on what I have read from him and from people speaking about the issue, the implication is that his visa has been canceled. Whatever the issue was that CBP said, his visa was canceled, which means he needs to reapply. It's not clear to me from the language I've seen that he just merely needs to say, I'm coming back. It seems to me that he needs to go through the process again. That's less than 2 weeks for him to get a visa to come to ICFA. And given that ShyCon was no small event, and frankly, it probably technically larger than ICFA, maybe ICFA has a little bit more pull academically, but I don't know. I don't know what the situation is, and that's a very big concern. But also, I think you're right, Trish, that from a personal level, does he really want to return to the United States? I mean, I wouldn't blame him. I mean, let's be real. Even if he was at fault, nobody wants to be detained for almost 3 days and then come back to a country that detained you. Even if, like, he made a visa error. Like, it's very clear that he didn't have ill intent, or at least it's clear to me he didn't have ill intent. He may have violated his visa. That, again, I'm speculating. I don't know that he did. But even still, like, being, like, if I were locked away for 2 or 3 days, like, yeah, I would very much hesitate about whether to return to that place.
So, to follow up with Rainbow Warrior 71 in the chat, who says that ICFA mentioned in an email that Oghenechovwe will be attending virtually. They did, in fact, make a tweet at 6:25 my time, which is Atlantic, 3 hours ago, saying the International Association for the Fantastic and the Arts is honored and proud to announce that Oghenechovwe Donald Ekpeki will be guest of honor in absentia for ICFA 44.
So he won't
which
be
means
attending.
that I figured, because I mean, even attempting to resolve that issue through a lawyer would not be enough time to get the visa and then fly, unfortunately. So the second tweet in that thread is that he will be attending some events live and some presentations will be pre-recorded, and that they will be available for exclusive viewing by those in attendance. So yeah.
That sucks.
Is
I
that
really
thing?
wanted to see him again because I've only met him once. And,
So
have I. Yeah,
but
yeah.
Oh yeah. So I will add this one other thing as an extension of this conversation. I think personally, as again, the only non-American in this room, and often one of the few non-Americans in most rooms, I think it's really glad that people are asking and being concerned in these ways about Oghenechovwe, in part because he has the accolades that he has and has worked so well as an editor on collections like Africa Risen. And I hope that sustains for him in the future as he continues to work. But I think that it's also very important to ask how often we exert this kind of energy in general whenever it comes to other writers of color, other writers outside of the US and Europe who want the same opportunity to physically attend, which is a thing that has been particularly important to me even before this point. Again, at Dublin, several writers from the continent didn't get the opportunity to attend because of visa shenanigans. That at that time, people simply commented, "This is unfortunate. I don't know how we can help. So I hope that you get to attend at some point in the future when the collective effort that can be made as a community to resolve these issues for writers of color outside of the metropole that is the United States wing of fandom would be enough to shift the tide and make things easier for folks who want to, just so much as writing a letter, letting consulates and embassies know, hey, this event exists and we have asked this person to attend, often does wonders for people to get their applications, if not fast-tracked, at least given attention. In a landscape where often people think if you're going to the United States, it's because you want to sneak off a work visa and get work and get more money and send it back home to your poor parents who need it in order to live, or that you're gonna like commit a crime or blow something up or some kind of weirdness like that, instead of the very often regular case that we just want to be seen in the place and do the thing that we value and go back home, because being in the United States is actually kind of exhausting. So I really do want folks to be willing to exert this kind of focus for more members of the community in general, more often in less high stakes circumstances than this, so that our visibility makes it easier for us to attend in the future.
To regularize it.
A thing
Yeah.
I did see was like a suggestion of some sort of like arts ambassador thing where like if you are a person who is a creator, being able to like be listed in your application as like, I'm part of this program that lets me, like, not that it would like automatically guarantee you to go, but would like fast track or at least grant you some leniency. Because, like, somebody, like, again, like, when we started this conversation, like, it wasn't like he was going to, like, podunkawards.com. He was going to the NAACP Image Awards, for fuck's sake. Like,
Yeah.
that's not a small award. That's a big fucking deal. And surely they, like, why isn't there a process? And I mean, I know why, but, like, why don't we have this process built in to where you could just say, hey, that's literally my fucking name on the award ballot for this big fucking award. Can I get like some sort of like, here you go, you can come in for like a week or whatever, 5 weeks or whatever, and just let people in so they can go to these events?
You just reminded me of a thing that ironically is now breaking my brain. So there is a kind of visa, there's a kind of US visa that well, there's a kind of application for a US work visa that is based on essentially proving to the US Embassy your high acumen in a certain caliber of the arts. And in order to make that application, you either need to meet a long list of creative criteria, you need to make over a certain amount of money yearly making your work, you need to be of a certain kind of regular kind of recognition in trade organizations, or you can apply immediately if you win one major award, which means that winning a Hugo would solve this problem, but we would be preventing individuals like Oghenechovwe to be present to receive the statue, which is incredibly ironic on its own. That's how kind of weird this is.
Yeah, I hate immigration. Like, I get it, but it's just, I don't know, like, it's just overly complex, and I don't know. He did win the Nebula during Blackout, Rainbow Warrior says, so there is that.
Oh, yeah.
So he'd already won a major award. So again, like, yeah, problem solved. I mean, again, I know why they have this set up, and it's just sort of silly. I don't know. It's a whole thing. So, okay, we got other topics. Not that this isn't important, but like I feel like we've beaten the horse on this one a bit.
We have.
So one of the other topics that has come up a bunch over the last couple of weeks, and arguably even earlier before that, well before, which is the issue of estates or publishers making edits to older works of literature. Now, there are two instances of this currently that people have been talking about. The big one that got everybody in a tizzy was the Roald Dahl edits to his books, which I believe the publisher has now walked back. And then now there is now the announcement that the Ian Fleming estate has issued a response about edits to some of Ian Fleming's work containing what they deem to be offensive language. My reading of that is that they're making some changes to some of the language to make it less offensive, but still keep it in the tone and feeling of the time, which to me just suggests that like it'll still be offensive. It'll just be like less so
Offensive light.
like offensive light, I guess, but sure. Now I wanted us to talk about this for lots of reasons, because people have lots of opinions about this, and I think the thing for me that got me really interested in talking about this was less like, should we be editing these older works, blah 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 blah, and more about the tone for me of the conversation that has been going on. Because when I went to go look up this issue, I had seen a couple articles. Like the NPR article is largely fine because it's fairly innocuous. But the thing I was finding was just how much everybody was like positioning themselves already within the culture war conversation, instead of having an honest conversation about like, what is the merits behind why we should edit older works? Why should we do that or not, for that, if you take the other view? Like, where was the moral or ethical conversation to be had about whether or not we should do this in the first place? What is the impact of it? What is the value of it? Instead, we were just like having people like place themselves on one side of the aisle or another. It's evil censorship, or like it's necessary so that the work continues to be relevant, and like all these kinds of like, we're part of this big grand conversation. And it just kind of started to piss me off, to be honest. I started getting really annoyed because like nobody was writing any, it was like just opinion pieces of like we all saw the thing with New York Times when like the 18,000th time they've published an opinion piece by somebody who didn't bother to do any basic research.
Oh
like,
God.
So please, I'm done. Yeah, talk.
Yeah. So I have my brain is overloaded, much like yours is, with how unnecessarily peculiar this entire conversation is. So I'll come at it from several different perspectives. One, when I was a teenager, I walked into my national library, like the largest library in Trinidad and Tobago, in Port of Spain. And I was able to, with my library card that has my date of birth, walk into the adult section of the library and leave with Goldfinger. Now, Goldfinger, if you have read Fleming, Goldfinger has a female character whose we must assume, whose christened name is Pussy Galore. I don't know why Fleming made that decision, but he did. And I am 14 or 15 years old, holding a book in my hand where a woman's name is Pussy Galore. And no one knew that I was reading it. No one knew who was in Goldfinger. They knew I was reading. Oh, you're reading a 007? Is it good? It was fine. I'm not particularly amazed by Fleming. But I remember going, ooh, this is a decision that an adult made, and I, a child, am witnessing it. And it's doing nothing for me. I've actually not watched any non-Brosnan, non-Craig 007, which is a thing that I should fix, but still.
Oh boy.
So right,
We got
so
a
that-
new
so
show
that's-
ad.
Oh
Yes.
God! Oh God!
Yes. Yes.
So right, so I state that as a prologue for the thing that is ultimately very revealing to me. We are in the most hypocritical culture war ever, where, and I say we like I'm an American, I'm above these issues for y'all. I lie.
Can I
These things
just say
happen.
that
These things happen in Trinidad too. I was literally still in high school the day that it made news that a book that was on the Caribbean Examination Council literature reading list was being banned from high schools because teachers didn't like that one teenager curses in one line. They don't know what the book is about, but they're mad that that happens. Meanwhile, this is happening the year that another high school book is being adapted to a movie where sex is the plot, where a teenage boy wanting to discover, like, having a sexual awakening is the plot of the book. So like, we are on this weird fulcrum where on one hand, people are getting very upset at the mere idea that editors can look at old work and still be in the position to be critical about whether this work still existing in this time is worthy of some level of editorial level critique, which I think is still fair. I think that disemployment is bad, but I think that that conversation is still fair. At the exact same time that we're saying that children should not be allowed to read books that are about people like them, because that is somehow more disconcerting and more like rawly upsetting than the idea that a woman's christened name is Pussy Galore.
That's wild. Okay, someone else to jump in. Trish, what do you think about all this?
I think I am fine with editing old works to remove the most awful stuff from them, but I think it's very important to keep somewhere in a footnote, a foreword, something, acknowledgements of the fact that it was changed, the context of the times it was written, and why it's changed, what is being changed, and why you have to change those things. I think it's important to not let people, read a new version of a Roald Dahl book and think, oh, this guy is great. It's all sunshine and roses, and, not know that the original version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory had Oompa Loompas that were basically a tribe of pygmies from Africa that Wonka had colonially exploited and brought back to work in his factory. I think it's very important studying. If you study Lovecraft, you need to study it in context and know what he was writing about, and know that his great fear of the cosmic unknowns and powers that dwarf our minds is tightly linked to his fear of the other, meaning anyone not a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, preferably with money from Rhode Island or England. It's context is very important. So I think just to chop out the bits that you don't like and pretend that they were never there, I think is a disservice to literature. Now, maybe you don't want children reading a children's book to have to wade through all that stuff, but you have to have it in there somewhere that this is not the original version. I remember listening to a radio play of Lair of the White Worm by Bram Stoker and thinking, oh, that was great. And reading later that, there are racist, sexist elements, and I don't remember any racism in that play, and that had all been chopped out. So I didn't, if I had just stopped at my original experience, I wouldn't have known. So keep the context in there somewhere. That's all I ask.
Paul, what about you?
So I wanna.
Brandon
yes.
wants to
Paul,
Go
respond.
ahead, Brandon. Brandon, talk.
No, I wanted to add also as an extension of that conversation. I can't remember right. So there is a black writer and comic creator named Anthony Weaver, who is very popular on TikTok for like these like otherwise very funny, very thoughtful critiques about anime and manga. Who somewhere around the anniversary of Doll's death did a trio of TikToks that I think are more important to me about the Roald Dahl conversation, which is I don't want people to edit Dahl's work textually. I want people to open Dahl's work with a foreword that reminds us that Roald Dahl was probably a very big creep. Because there are things about Roald Dahl as a person people did not know, like that based on some parts of his biography, it is fair to assume that he may or may not have been a sociopath and then didn't want children because he was worried that children were sociopaths. So maybe let me know that, but you don't need to change anything about the work itself. I would like to know the work is still in his, like, let me know that, let me be the one to be aware of the fact that I'm engaging with the work as it is, because then I'm making an assumption, one of the assumptions that I'm making about the work and its creator and the time that it's created in is an assumption that I'm being made about what I've witnessed, not what someone has given me. And I think that people should be in a position, much like they've done with Song of the South, to be able to go, hey, I know that this is bad, but we're representing this fully, so you know this is what people were doing and saying at that time, so we can be better stewards of our present. I think that's more important.
Paul, you want to jump in, please?
There's lots of ways I could take this. I'll go with the historical perspective. So, so in the early 19th century, there was a pair of siblings, Thomas and Henrietta, who decided that they wanted to clean up a particular author's work to make it family friendly for children. They cleaned up all of Shakespeare's plays and published them as the Family Shakespeare. These siblings, you will probably recognize the name because their name has become a verb. They were the Bowdlers. Thomas and Henrietta Bowdler decided to go through all of Shakespeare and make them family friendly. Now we have the word Bowdlerized. So this is not a new phenomenon where people try to clean things up for the sake of the children. And I mean, the funny thing is, even as assiduous as they are to try to clean up all of Shakespeare, they still missed some double entendres and other stuff in their final versions. Anyways, just showing that these efforts are in vain in some cases, and I mean, it's like, where do you stop that? But here I want to ask a question of the three of you. So it's an estate, it's a publisher that's doing this to Roald Dahl's work, or was going to do Dahl's work if they work it back. I'm reminded of when creators do it to their own work, say Steven Spielberg changing things in Star Wars and E.T. How do we feel about if an author decided, I'm going to change my past work? I mean, in this case here, we have somebody who's not the original creator changing the work or wanting to. What if the actual creator wanted to republish a work and change it? How would you feel about that?
What is mine? Okay, so there are two kinds of there are two things that emerge in my brain for this. One is I once read a collection of poets, a collection of poetry by I think it was Yeats at that time. I was reading a lot of poetry. I was a nerd in high school. I'm sorry.
Really?
The foreword of
tell.
which
no, there's no way we would know that. Yeah.
The foreword of which I very strongly remember opening with this essay from a previous editor who was like, The very first poem in this collection appears in its most recently unedited form. I am drawing attention to that specifically because it is the longest version of this poem that this poet has ever submitted to me. Every time I've edited a collection by this poet, they would send me this poem again, and it'd be 2 stanzas longer. And I'm like, yeah, it's his poem. He's discovered that it's incomplete, and he's asking you now to present the complete one for other people's presumption. And that might seem extravagant on one end, but on the other end, it's his poem and he's discovered that it's incomplete. Don't you want to hear what else he has to say? Similarly, I think that if a poet decides, I have told you too much, or I've said a thing that is dishonest or untrue or unfair, that they should be in a position to say they don't want to share it anymore. So that's one thing. And then on the other end, which is a completely different kind of conversation, but is still similar to me, I think a lot about And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, because that's not the book's name.
Right.
But if you put the book on with its original name in any bookstore in the United States right now, who do you think is going to pick it up and read it? People who like Agatha Christie? Or somebody else?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a hard answer.
Search your heart. Search your heart. You know what I am about to say to be true. There will be people who read it and go, oh, am I about to watch a certain caliber of person die? It's like, this is not everybody, but not everybody knows Christie. Not everybody knows the example that I'm presently making. And the people who don't are going to be bad readers. And on some level, an editor should be willing to ask, even about old work, am I fine with bad readers making bad assumptions about my work because I didn't do a good job about framing the work for my readers?
I guess
I mean, the fact that Christie was still alive when she titled the book is also a problem. But then again, she was drawing on a cultural history that is older still than her. But still, why?
So I want to come back to this via a different direction because Carturo, I think, made a comment that's directed at me because Carturo probably knows that I'm going to have very strong opinions about this, which is that Han shot first and any other interpretation of it is wrong and George Lucas can go fuck himself. He's wrong. I think there's an interesting dynamic here, which is I understand, like with film and so on, when there's a desire to improve, right? I mean, some of us in this chat currently and some people in the actual chat room for the Twitch at the moment are writers. And I suspect I can speak for the writerly types that you never feel like it's really finally done. There are probably things you would change even after it's effectively published. But I think that once something leaves your domain as the creator to be consumed by someone else for whatever reason, it now no longer is yours. Except, don't you dare, Paul. I see your little mouth moving like you're gonna disagree with me. We're gonna have a fucking fight. I'm just kidding. I love you, Paul. The only exception I would make to this for me is if we're dealing with questions of fact. So documentaries, etc., I think have a moral duty to actually make corrections so that they present accurate information. But fiction is fundamentally made up. And so when you send that out for the person to consume it, the question now becomes, do I still have the right to control it? Now, I think, like, literally, yeah, the author can do whatever they want with it, literally. But then they have to face the consequence, which is that the fan, the reader, may decide, no, I do not want to be any part of this, and I'm going to reject your decision. I, as a Star Wars fan, to pick the kind of silliest example that has come up already, would say that it is fundamentally wrong for George Lucas to refuse to release the original theatrical release and digital remaster. Obviously, he doesn't control it anymore, so it's now fundamentally wrong for Disney not to do that. And the reason for that is that that original experience is fundamental to how so many people became Star Wars fans. To give them an alternative experience that is not that experience, to me, seems to violate the original pact made between the creator and the fan, or the creator and the viewer. But that said, if they decide to do it, all I can do is complain. I can't send death threats, I can't throw a hissy fit, and I definitely shouldn't be going to the New York Times and writing an op-ed where I don't do any of my own research and I just write some bullshit for 500 words and get paid $300.
So fiction is very fraught, right? Because you bring two seemingly contradictory thoughts to mind. One is in response to Carturo in chat about the fact that Matrix Resurrections exists almost uniquely to rebut people, these certain communities of people who have reclaimed the imagery from the Matrix for their own ends. Namely, it is an established literary analytical fact that the red pill, blue pill analogy is a reference to transition. But because of people being unnecessarily obtuse about the nature of metaphor, it has transitioned in popular culture to this hostile analogy about how the truth of the world is how we maintain traditional values rather than upend traditional values, which is again very obvious about the Matrix, regardless. So a lot of Matrix Resurrections is just Lana Wachowski in particular going, you made this assumption about the movie, and that makes you a fool. But also about the fact that the Matrix as a whole has been co-opted by corporate interests and by public perception so strongly that it shouldn't continue to exist. And the only real value that is consistently drawn from it is the question of how we relate to each other in the digital age. And on one hand, I think that it's really rad that Lana decided that was still a movie that needed to be made, even while the only reason the movie exists is because HBO came to, because Warner came to her and said, hey, do you want to make another Matrix movie? And after years of saying no, she said yes, and did this particularly revolutionary thing. But I also think that it's rad that Lily was supposed to join her and Lily said no. That Lily decided this movie now sufficiently does not belong to me, and I'm done trying to take it back.
I
So
didn't know
think
any
that-
of this actually.
Oh yeah, I mean,
I did not know about this split. No, this is all new. I've not seen the new Matrix movie.
yeah, I have no.
So, yeah,
I'm not assuming that it was a hostile disagreement by any means, but it's noteworthy
A
that
strong
Lily.
one, clearly, yes.
It's noteworthy that Warner Brothers asked both of them to do it, and only Lana came back. So on the one hand, there is a kind of merit in going, I am retelling this story because I want to correct an assumption that has been made. And on the other hand, it is similarly revolutionary to say, this is no longer in my hands. People have already broken the thing. And at that point, there is no rescuing it, if that makes sense.
I will just note that I am one of the people that did not know what the And Then There Were None mystery novel's original name was. And so I Googled it. And
Yeah,
this is one of those
I'm-
situations where,
yeah,
you can change that title. Like, if
Yeah,
the
yeah.
title...
yes, please,
I have not read
please
this
do.
book, so I can't speak to whether or not the book
But
itself is
someone,
racist.
when
but-
Christy was alive, was like, "Why would you change that? It's just a line from a nurse. It's just a line from
a
From a
nursery rhyme,
nursery.
a
children's
minstrel
song.
Right,
yeah.
a nursery song.
Yeah, I think this
and
is one
all
of those
the black people
where-
in the room are like, why is it a nursery rhyme? I wonder what about the culture in which you live made that a decent nursery rhyme?
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about it?
Mhm.
This is one, like, this doesn't, I know there's a lot of talk about, like, the value of titles and stuff, but, like, that's not, to me, a very fundamental change to a story, whereas the kinds of language characters use, if we just change them to make them modern, that's a pretty substantial adjustment. Like, there's a lot of, like, Flannery O'Connor, where, like, Flannery O'Connor is using the language very much of the particular, like, the 1940s
Mhm,
America
mhm.
of
Yeah.
the South, 1940s South America, not South as in like where Carturo lives, just to be clear,
Yeah.
South United States. And I feel like if you change that to make it modern, well, like, those stories stop working.
Yeah.
There's a
The
story that I
language
won't.
is very immersive. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, please. No, yeah.
The language of Flannery O'Connor is very immersive. It is very much of its time and place. And by reading it in that language, you really feel the atmosphere, the cultural mores that people are living under. And if you just cleaned it up into modern, proper grammatical English and got rid of all the special ways of saying things, you eviscerate the story. They lose their point.
Yeah, and even still, like, if you take something like A Good Man Is Hard to Find,
Uh-huh.
where the grandmother character, I'm glad, Trish, you've read that story, because you and I are going to be best friends right now. Like, the grandmother character says, like, these very old-timey Southern things about, like, people that she sees on the side of the road, and she says sort of, like, kind of racist things, not, like, super racist, but, like, still kind of racist. But, like, if you wipe that out and just have her say, like, something that is more modern that would not be racist, like, that all disappears, and the tragedy loses its impact. Whereas, like, the tragedy of that story is, like, this grandmother fundamentally led to the deaths of her entire family horribly because of her own decisions, where she could not see see what she was doing and the way in which was leading to more conflict, instead of backing away and realizing that she could have saved everybody by not being so prim and proper and trying to worm her way out of things.
Configuration Queen says we're
We're spoiling.
spoiling. We're getting
I'm so sorry. You're right. We need to
Wow.
wait another 15 years before
We
the
are-
spoiler warning on that one.
We are spoiling a story that is, what, older than everyone in this room?
It is
Certainly.
older than some of
Yes,
us
but-
in this room by twice.
Mhm.
So I would just say, but yeah, like, I just feel like I understand the motivation to want to update language to make it more modern, like, especially for, like, a kid's book where its goal is, like, it's supposed to reach new generations of kids, but there's also, like, a conversation to be had of, like, well, maybe this work, yeah, okay, maybe we modernize it, but we need to also acknowledge, like, there's also the old version that's here, and this version is from 1957, and, like, it reflects its time. Let's have that conversation about why it's not 1957 anymore, beyond just time progressives. That's my big concern, is just, like, what are we losing? Like, what is being lost in our conversations? Are we giving people a sense of the world that isn't real? Like, Flannery O'Connor just doesn't, you cannot update Flannery O'Connor. It's impossible. Roald Dahl, I mean, maybe you can, but I don't know that I find that to be. If the book is so irredeemably bad and full of bad things, maybe we should just stop reading that book to our kids.
On the one hand,
It's a-
I'm
it's-
inclined to see the value in that. On the other hand, I feel like, and this is why I say this fulcrum is a weird place to be, the question isn't, I think, what people should and should not be allowed to read. It's, what exactly is the message that we're actually giving people in the world? And that means we need people to read more, but more diligently and more communally, by which I mean, I want children to read as much work as possible. Obviously, you can't read everything. I'm not saying put things that are of a certain rating or of a certain level in the hands of a 10-year-old. But I am saying, it is far more resourceful to be in a position of trust with your children, whether they be your familial children, the children that you teach, the children that you steward as a pastor or a community leader or anything like that, that you foster a level of trust whereby you know they can read essentially anything and come back to you and go, I have discovered this thing, can we talk about it? Because the problem is everyone wants to live in a world where their children will talk to them, but is utterly frustrated that they live in a world where children cannot talk to them and are learning from the rest of the world, and then are upset when they're learning things that they don't want them to learn, whether those things are good or bad, instead of creating a landscape where children can actually learn alongside, and sometimes very important to me as someone who used to be a child, sometimes teach their parents things as a result of being thoughtful about the content that they read. And I think especially now the middle ground of both of these fundamental discourses, what we ban in schools and what we edit in work, is ultimately, if you are so hesitant to create a society in which people can witness bad, harmful, traumatic things and still be able to come back to the people that they should trust and go, I want to know how I can be better and make a better world from this. If you are not prepared to answer that fundamental question as a parent, as an educator, or as a politician, then you should not have children teach children or be in a position of power. And I feel like that we've said punto final on this topic in particular.
I think we have.
So, the other thing that I was particularly very curious about talking about this evening was AI. In particular, because we're fed up of talking about AI. But because AI keeps doing new, weird, and bad things that keep alienating creators from their ability to remain viable in the industry, and the latest industry that it has complicated has actually been SFF short fiction. Because Neil Clark of Clark's World announced just over a week ago, as of time of recording, that Clark's World is now closed for submissions because they have been getting inundated with artificially crafted short story submissions that have somewhat complicated their ability to continue not only like finding and weeding out quote unquote real work, but have kind of revealed some of the breaking points of short fiction submission in this space in particular, in a way that is worth noting, because it's not only revealed how AI is going to continue making the way that we sell fiction more complicated, but the conversation itself has also been sour in a lot of ways, and is also revealing about some of the other issues about short fiction in general. So I definitely wanted to talk about that with folks. So first and foremost, AI and its ability to write a short story. Do we need a Turing test to tell whether a short story was written by a human now?
Well, I've as people who are parts of my Patreon will know, I've put in a couple of prompts to see just how bad this stuff is, and it is painfully juvenile and terrible. I will read one paragraph for you.
God.
As the last rays of the sun disappeared behind the mountains, a young girl named Maya sat alone on the rooftop of her family's apartment building. She stared up at the sky, watching as the stars began to twinkle into view. But something else caught her eye. A bright streak of light shot across the sky, leaving behind a trail of shimmering green and blue. Yeah, it doesn't get any better. It's just It's like it's stuff I'd write when I was 10. It just it has no punch. It has no verve. It's just like remixed words into things. It's like for the rest of the night, Maya and S23 talked. They talked about Earth, about the Galactic Federation, about the universe, and all the secrets it held. It's like
I'm sold. Where's the movie?
it's like no, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible.
Configuration Queen
I mean-
muted themselves while you were reading.
Okay,
I
so,
tell you,
here's
that was probably a smart
Well,
thing
the
to
thing
do.
is, I've read worse than that from people. The point about Chat AI writing stories is not that it's bad and that it will degrade people who read it. The point is that it takes away work from real human beings who want to express themselves and share their ideas with other people. And B, the point of great art is to share human experiences, not to cut, paste, remix, reblend stuff that already other people have written and said. And you need to speak to what's happening now by writing from your heart and trying to make money by selling laughably low-priced stories to online magazines or whatever is just terrible. And C, also the effect of this is of these chat AI stories flooding submissions is dangerously close to taking us back to making markets inaccessible to young starting out writers and writers from countries who can't pay postal costs and people who don't have the money to pay submission fees if they send out their stories to 20 magazines trying to make a sale. So it's just bad all around.
Or have technical problems sending money to a U.S.
That too.
Publisher.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm glad you raised that because that was a thing I was thinking about when Clark's World in particular, Neil Clark, was raising this. They closed submissions, and I will be honest, I'm sure that Clark's World has closed for submissions at some point in the past. I cannot remember the last time that was public.
I mean, he had like heart surgery and the submissions were
Yeah.
still
They
open.
haven't closed for at least 10 years. Some other magazines have periods where they regularly open and close, but Clark's World was always open, and so it was a real unfortunate milestone for them to have to do that.
Yeah. And so it raises very serious questions, which is like exactly what you said, Trish. If this continues to happen, I don't know that it will, but if it does, when we continue to see submission systems like Submittable, etc., being flooded with AI stories from people who really just see it as a grift, which is a problem that Clark's World has referenced, Neil Clark in particular, right? Which is that some of these people, it's not that they're really aspiring writers, they see it as a quick buck, which is someone should have took,
which means they don't know anything about
literally
science
nothing
fiction.
about publishing if they think it's a quick buck. But you're left at this situation, which is Clark's World is like most science fiction magazines. It does not have, permanent paid crew in large numbers. Any literary magazine really doesn't have that. And so it's largely volunteers. And at some point, the submission numbers are just so high that even though you have to verify all these, and even though there are no effective methods of detection yet, maybe there will be later, I don't know, it just becomes untenable. And so exactly what you're saying, Trish, they're between a rock and a hard place. If this continues to happen, they're going to have to make changes, or submissions would just be perpetually closed because they're flooded. And neither of those is good, because if the submissions are flooded and they have to close, that means not a lot of new people are never going to get their work seen. And Clark's World's notorious for very quick turnover. I think the longest I've ever had them hold a story was a week. So that should tell you something. Most of the time they're back to you in like 2 days, usually sometimes same day, like depending on where your submission goes. So you end up with this like weird situation, which is, do they just continue to do it and they remain closed? Do they go to submission fees, which largely is going to cut a lot of people out? Do they go to paper submissions? Like, all the options suck, and they all are going to exclude people. And so this whole thing is, whether the people doing it know they're doing it or not, they're literally creating the conditions that are going to exclude people from this process.
But so the part that matters to me is submissions in general is not as democratic as people already would like to think it should be already, and it getting worse would not be very helpful. The only real benefit right now is that you can submit via email or via a website to many places. Because the alternative is, if I did have to send a self-addressed stamped envelope to a publisher, even if I did have the money to send it, it's not getting there for a month. So if I miss the window, I missed the window. So like, on that end, attempting to find physical solutions to the problem are not ideal. But the mechanical solutions to the problem aren't ideal either. One, because a lot of them will at some point require some amount of money, and two, because the grift is designed to be a grift because it's easy. The fact that there are places literally going, hey, you can use AI to write stories and use that as a source of residual income, implies that they don't actually care when a story is sold or what it means or what its value is. They just care that it's 6 cents a word. And the part that matters to me because of that, I can't remember which, I can't remember if it was the Verge article when I saw this the first time, but one of the very important follow-ups to that large-scale conversation about AI was a tweet by Vajra Chandrasekhara about the fact that an unnamed editor in a piece about AI's effect on short fiction sales seemed to be complaining about the fact that writers from countries outside of the US will typically write in order to get paid like every other writer, as if to imply that it's as if to imply that it's a con that we're pulling off. And again, I want to be very patient to that potential unnamed editor. But that's a weird thing to just add out of the blue to the context of this particular struggle. And right, it was the Verge article. I can literally read this. This is the paragraph in which this statement appears. But the possibility of being paid is a factor. In some cases, Clark has corresponded with people who've been banned for submitting AI-generating work, saying they need the money. Another editor told The Verge that even before the AI-generated stories, they'd get submissions and emails from writers in countries where the cost of living is lower, and an $80 publication fee goes much farther than it does in the US. I live in one of those countries. If I sell a 3,000-word short story, that can pay every bill that I need it to. That's a lot of groceries for me. That's like, it's still not a great deal of money, but it's more money than you can suppose when I need to eat or need to make sure that I'm still connected to the internet. It's very weird to make that juxtaposition here, as if maybe those other writers are just making shit up for. Yes, I am making shit up for money because I need to eat to live.
Fiction writing.
Yeah. Like, the attempt to solve the problem has already been muddied by the nature of capitalism so badly that even the way that we have conversations about what makes someone a writer and what makes someone an opportunist has become tenuous to even discuss. And I want us to be able to get to the point where we can solve this problem without potentially alienating communities that are already making work in this space and would like to continue making things.
So I want to.
Yeah,
go
but
ahead.
you, the writer, are not just spewing random predictive texts. You are seeing the world, observing it, distilling thoughts about it, and trying to share those with people about the way the world is, about the way you want the world to be, about the way you fear the world is becoming. Those parts of the artistic process are mocked by this scraping and blending that AIs are doing. And
No, but I can even
fight it, but
like,
yeah, it's terrible.
yeah, like even like as a former editor, I can even kind of comment on like the distinction between those two things in a more real sense, which is when I used to edit poetry for Fire, I got a noticeable percentage, a noticeable fraction of poetry submissions every month, every quarter while Barack Obama was still president of the United States would be about Barack Obama.
Oh, okay. That's not where I thought you were going with this.
No, yeah, worse things have happened. But every once in a while, I would get an African writer sending a poem that is about blackness from an imagined American perspective that neither I nor the poet has, or about how cool it is that Obama was president, or like things that I felt like they were not giving me something that was pure and genuine of themselves. They were giving me a thing that they thought I would appreciate as a performance of blackness, because black is in the title of the. And even then, I do not judge any of them. Even if they wrote the idlest poem that came to mind because they needed some quick money in order to continue living for a couple of weeks, I don't judge them. Because a lot of those poems were still good because they still came from some imagined perception that this creator genuinely had. You can't ask ChatGPT, what is this story about?
Because it doesn't know.
You can't do an interview with ChatGPT, ask you, well, about your ideas and influences and thoughts about the story. It's just soulless predictive text.
I wrote
There's
this
no
story.
there.
I wrote this story because this person with the IP address stated here asked me this question, and I thought that it would be interesting to imagine it from this point of view. So what do you care about the issue? The issue is something that was mentioned by this IP address here. It's like, cool, thanks, ChatGPT.
Yeah, there's like no conversation.
That was very informative.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
a lot of what you're saying is like there is an element of a lot of creative work is either in the process of its creation or in the way it is consumed by the person on the other end, right? It becomes part of a conversation, whether that's people sharing it among themselves or people talking to the creator about the thing. And some of that is like formalized in the forms of interviews, but some of that is also in the ways we talk. But how do you actually talk about, like if I do a book club on a thing I know is an AI.
What do you think this author means about this work?
They
I
mean
think
nothing.
this author means 101011.
Right? Like the only way I can actually make that a meaningful conversation is to have an inside knowledge of the way in which that the machine generated text is made. But that only tells me the biases of the people that made it, or the interests of the people that made it, or something about the data set that it used to come up with the formula. But it tells me nothing about like if Brandon, like I will just mention, my mom is in chat, and I'm sure she's looking for a new book. Where Brandon has written.
I noticed. Hi.
But I will note that Brandon has written a poetry book called "Can You Sign My Tentacle," which my mom should buy and read immediately. But like, if I talk to you, I have interviewed you about that book. Like, I can ask you about specific poems, and I can actually talk about the themes and the ideas and the meanings that you were kind of going for. Or I can ask you even simplistic questions of like, what were you thinking when you made this poem? And you can tell me, well, I had a weird interaction with a leaf, and the leaf and I were talking one day, and then I wrote a poem. That is not part of any of the poems that are in Can I Sign Your Tentacle? But my mom is asking very specifically, can you sign My Tentacle by Brandon O'Brien? It is a fantastic book. Brandon O'Brien's put it in the chat. You're welcome. Go buy a copy, and you are about to experience a very exciting thing. So anyway, like, yeah.
So I want to touch on that very briefly as well, because I noticed this very hilarious thing in the Verge article where so it's two very different things. One is an editor from Asimov's who, like, this is the opener of the piece, which is this very hilarious anecdote from an editor from Asimov's who notes the fact that every month she gets a new story, and the title of the story is The Last Hope. I'm like, why is it always The Last Hope? I guess you haven't run out of hope yet. And then there's also another editor who notes the fact that every AI generated story has a character with piercing green eyes. I'm like, there are things that you can learn and glean about the overall culture of literature from that perspective. What are we biasing? What is the bias of a genre? The bias of a genre is that apparently we're running out of hope. What is the bias of character description? The bias of character description is lots of pretty white people, and I think that those things are noteworthy as observing data sets. But as individual stories, the value of an individual story is not that it is an amalgam of things. There is this wonderful book. I say that the book is by Jonathan Safran Foer, but it is not by Jonathan Safran Foer. It's called Tree of Codes, but it's actually an adaptation of another book where Jonathan Safran Foer just cut pieces of text out of the physical book and then sent it to a publisher to have it reprinted with the holes in it. Essentially as like a large blackout poem. And on its face, that is supposed to be similar to the assumptions that people make about how AI regenerates text. That it's literally taking the words out of someone else's mouth and rearranging it in a way that is supposed to still be valuable. But when a creator does it, all of those choices are purposeful, even if nothing about the text has changed. The fact that the holes are in the book is part of how you read it.
Yeah, it's the
and I feel like and I feel like that lack of intention is particularly valuable.
Trish?
So yes, Trish, I apologize.
Please jump in.
Right. So I don't think anyone on the stream or even anyone in the chat actually thinks that AI generated stories are good. I'd just like to bring up a couple of other news points from this week that are relevant. Paizo, P-A-I-Z-O, which is a game company, which a lot of its stuff is related to role-playing games, similar to Dungeons and Dragons and often working with Dungeons and Dragons. They made an announcement on Wednesday that they had banned all AI-generated art and text from its community content, as well as in-house staff-written, produced things, and that is going to be in all its contracts moving forward. Now, it's not clear how enforceable that is going to be. It's currently filters that are trying to test for AI produce a lot of false positives as well as false negatives, and as the algorithms get smarter, it will presumably become harder and harder to test for that. But if you get caught somehow, there will be consequences, and I think that's great. They're not the first publishing house to do that, but I'm glad that they are making that strong stand. I think it is horrific that some major publishing houses are using are using AI generated art for their covers. So that's one thing. They're not the first to do this, but it's worth mentioning. Another thing is that CNET, which is a news site, is apparently doubling down on its use of AI after getting caught posting a lot of stories that were AI generated a month or so ago and having to issue corrections for half their articles. The company is now laying off between 10 and 50% of its news staff, depending on which articles you read, though they say that that is unrelated. Their editor-in-chief is stepping down from her role and becoming senior VP of AI content strategy. So, it's
unrelated.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
So,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, this battle, this whole social issue is not just going on in writing and science fiction. It's all over various media formats. And we can't solve it tonight, but I certainly think it was worth talking about.
Yeah, I think it was Victoria Strauss that was suggesting that writers put it into their contracts that their materials aren't usable in AI dumping grounds or anything like
that your stuff can't be used by the publishing house for scraping. And also you really ought to put in your contract that you don't want cover art generated by AIs either. Right. Creative people should support each other.
I really think this is also,
because if I recall correctly, I was just gonna add, if I recall correctly, I think Tor had an issue a couple of weeks ago where a major author had their cover designed by AI. Right, Paulini. I did not know that it was happening. Saw the cover, thought that the cover was good. Did not notice. Didn't notice any red flags and had to be alerted afterward that it was generated via AI, and that was a thing, and it could have been avoided if folks were at least willing to have the conversation amongst each other about what tools they were and were not comfortable using, let alone it just kind of happened. So yeah.
A part of this is a thing we're going to have to reckon with, which is that even though there are all these organizations saying we will not do AI art, this show is not interested in AI created art or writing or anything. However, there are going to be people who are not going to tell. And without effective detection methods, there won't be a way to know. Like, this reminds me in a weird way of like when digital self-publishing started to become a thing. Where you could sell things online and there were mechanisms in Amazon you could sell things. There were lots of people who would just like invent a publisher, even though all it was for themselves, right? They didn't publish anybody else. And they would say, oh, but I'm traditionally published. But they were actually self-published, and they were lying to people that they were traditionally. Nowadays, you've got people that do like little collectives and stuff, and it's a bunch of indie authors together that have a publisher together. Or there are people where it's like, it's just my name. It's, Sean Duke Productions, in which case everybody knows it's self-published. It's just whatever. But that like dishonesty, like really sours people when they find out about it. And I would be very, very, very angry if we read a book and I found out that it was AI generated and nobody said anything. Because I expect that when I read a book, it's written by a human, or at the very least a fucking cat. Like, has written that book, right? Or like a fucking elephant sat in a room and they just let him like smack his little trunk against words. Because at least then there's some sort of agent that is a thinking being making those decisions. But if you told me like this book was written by AI, but we hid it from you all these times, I'd be so mad. I'd be angry. Like if they started generating anime as AI generated anime, like, oh my god. And that's a thing that can come because they're already audiobooks audiobook people are being asked, and voice actors are being asked now to sign away their voice rights for use in AI, which is
Yeah, that's really distressing.
very, yeah. And I think my mom and the
especially considering that even if you haven't, once there is enough voice samples of you on the internet, which if you produce video or audio at all, there are people using AI to just manufacture video and audio recordings of you anyway.
Oh yeah, all four of us have certainly been on the internet enough to have that happen.
Yeah, I mean, you could do it. I mean, we already are concerned about the deep fake, right? The invention of people that aren't real. You can do that with audio already to some degree. They did it for an artistic purpose, which was with the Val Kilmer documentary. But they did it because he had cancer in the throat, and so he couldn't actually speak some of the bits. So they used AI to sort of regenerate it. I mean, it wasn't pure AI; it was like combination. But like that's different because there's a person who would speak the words, but they just can't use that voice, so they used it to sort of give an homage to that person. But that person also was voluntarily saying, do this thing for this artistic purpose because of the documentary.
So I just want to say as an aside right now to everyone in chat, so you can remember that we had this conversation. If at any point in the future you see a clip that looks like it came from a Skiffy and Fanty video recording of any kind, where somebody says that it came from a podcast that we made, and we say something that you consider utterly reprehensible, you better be able to source the podcast or the individual stream video that it came from.
This is the reality of where we're at right now. This is not just unique to AI. We're in a very serious problem, which is that it is very easy to fake that people have done things or said things or have been present in places where they weren't. And while there are experts that can detect things like fake images and photoshopping and stuff, the average individual just simply does not have those skills. That they're very advanced. I mean, unless it's like very obvious.
I mean, there are some things that you can still tell, but they're getting better at hiding them.
And they will get better and better.
Yep.
And so we need to start having very serious conversations about what our methods for researching this stuff will be. How do we detect these things? How do we determine they really did happen? If, heaven forbid, we're all on a podcast where we tell you that we all hate Star Wars. First off, I'm going to tell you right now, if I ever say publicly that I hate Star Wars, it's a fucking lie. That is not true. My mom knows it. She's in the chat right now. She knows how much I fucking love Star Wars. If George Lucas came into my house right now, I wouldn't be upset that he invaded my home property. I'd probably wet myself as a giant fan. So,
noted.
I'm looking at Arturo's bit. This kind of reminds me of the movie The Congress, which is about a fake Robin Wright who sells basically her digital self. And the studio just basically makes versions of her in movies over and over again.
Andrew's Dream of Electric Sheep, because the whole thing with what's his name, the character that's on the TV all the time, like even Isidore sits there and wonders, how is he on TV all the time? Like they must have just recorded extra or something, because he's on TV more than there are hours in the day.
Yeah, or I mean, this is not a new issue as a speculative fiction topic,
but it's becoming real,
right? But it's suddenly much more immediate than it used to be.
Okay, so we gotta kind of ram through towards closing here. So I know we have 2 announcements that need to be made. So Trish, there's an announcement for a certain award. Do you want to make that announcement real quick about what's happening?
The Nebula Nebula nominations closed, and finalists voting is coming up. The Hugo nominations opened on March 1 and will close on April 30. I, for one, didn't get any email, so I have to find out how to get added to Shangdu's mailing list. So if you haven't heard about it, go, let's see, I'll drop the link in chat, but this will be a thing coming up. Nominating is fun. And so if you don't have to come up with 5 things for every category. You can just, for nominations, you can just send in one thing if it's your favorite thing. So I'd encourage everyone to do that. Also, the BSFA award finalists have been announced recently.
Yeah, and we'll put links in the show notes or possibly in the chat while we're kind of working towards things. But yeah, so keep an eye out for that stuff. Do make sure to vote in the Hugos. This is a reminder, we are eligible as for Best Fancast if you think we deserve to be nominated for our work in the previous year. If you don't, that's okay. I mean, I do cry at night about this.
We will still love you.
I mean, it's 50-50 for me. But yeah, I mean, Brandon will still love you. But keep in mind, too, there are other podcasts that you can nominate for Best Fancast. So it's okay if you want to nominate some new folks because, hey, there's literally 10 trillion fucking podcasts. So maybe tell your friends about us, but also tell us about your favorite podcasts because there are lots of other ones.
Yeah, and I will very briefly implore, even if you have never voted for, and especially if you have never voted for the Hugos before or nominated for the Hugos before, and even and especially if you've never attended Worldcon before, now more than ever, it is particularly important for fandom to kind of expand past its present assumptions. So please feel free to nominate for the Hugos. Please feel free to tell your other fellow nerds that the Hugos are a thing that exists and that they can participate. Because I literally had an impromptu Twitter poll at ShyCon that Sean is aware that I did, where I asked people under 20 on Twitter if they knew that they could vote for the Hugos, and the majority of people who have never attended Worldcon before did not know that the Hugos weren't juried. So please, if you've never nominated for the Hugos before, please let your friends know that that's a thing that they can do.
Oh, okay. So apparently Carter wants to be nominated just to wear a Free Tibet t-shirt on stage. Yeah, I'm just going to say that's probably not going to happen. I mean, not the nomination
You wear
part.
the Free Tibet t-shirt, I will wear the Free Palestine t-shirt. What will Paul wear?
Free Chipotle.
Oh dear God!
Free Hong Kong.
Free Hong
Kong. Right.
Free Hong Kong.
Yeah, I feel like that's a great way
that.
for us to all disappear. Just saying.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's how Paul never wanted about it trying to.
So last two things, I do want to note we're not going to cover them on the show because we've run almost about 2 hours now.
We've run twice our normal.
Because Paul is as.
No,
I'm
it's
sorry.
Friday.
It's Friday. Come on, you don't know
Friday.
Rebecca Black's
Oh,
Friday?
Lord.
Oh my God, Paul! I need to send you.
The famous PSYOP Friday.
Okay, Paul, I will send you a video of meme songs I want you to study. I will have a quiz on Monday.
Oh dear.
So
Oh dear God.
anyway, but there's two.
Yes, I usually don't show my face, Mrs.
Sean.
So,
I'm
yes,
married
this is
to
actually
my
my
mom. We won the fort. Wow.
I didn't know what to call your mom. I didn't know what to call your mom.
Mrs.
Sean's mom
Duke.
You could call. She's not a duke.
Mrs.
She's
Duke?
not Duke
Oh,
either.
sorry.
Yes,
I apologize.
I might just turn.
She
up,
has a username. You can just call her friendly.
Okay. Now I look in a way that Sean's mom was more used to.
Wow.
Quick.
Wow, she went yuck. Now I need to know why. I'm
Short
so
version
curious.
of all of
We're
it.
not gonna have that conversation tonight.
No.
We're not gonna have that
The story
conversation
has to be
tonight.
told because I need Paul to understand the extra levels of embarrassment that this has now created. So my mom had me at a very young and tender age, which means that during high school, we weren't that far apart. And so I would regularly get one of two things. Either my mom was my girlfriend, or I would be told by people at school that my mom was hot. Neither of which is helpful.
Yeah.
And apparently also sister, but sister doesn't
dear.
bug me that much as being.
I mean, yeah. Like sister is fine. Like the hierarchy is sister, girlfriend, boys your age making statements about your mother.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
said things. Let me just say, yeah. Would I
I'm
hook
sorry,
them
Sean.
up with my mom? Like, no, I'm not gonna help you with that.
Wait! Oh my God! Jesus Christ! I'm so sorry.
It's high school.
Sean.
It's a bunch of like teenage boys
Oh,
like
dear.
having sudden influxes of testosterone. Half of them like one testicle's fallen. Like it's a whole thing. Anyway, moving on.
Oh dear.
So quick
Yes.
things. We have one question that from Robert that we're not going to get to today, but we'll put into the next Clacks, which will be coming up. Just look again at skiffingfanny.com slash sorry, not skiffingfanny.com, twitch.tv/skiffingfanny. Go to the about page. Full schedule is there, so you know what day is the next Clacks. Because I've not committed it to memory because I'm old. But we'll get back to Robert's question. It's about classic superheroes. But I do want to note, and I will put in the show notes for this, and Brandon, if you wouldn't mind for the people in the chat live, Brandon has kindly put up an interesting question that folks might want to answer. You can send us a tweet, or you can tweet direct to Brandon to his tweet. And that question is, can you give an example of a fantasy horror film that is also a crime mystery suspense film? We're not going to cover that today, but I feel like listeners should cover it. What's an example?
Yeah, it's a question that I just spontaneously asked on Twitter late last night, like literally early this morning rather. And while I've already been getting a great deal of wonderful answers, some of which from people who are presently in chat right now, I am still very much expecting a great deal more answers because some of those things are really cool. I was looking forward to just kind of hearing folks talk about their favorite movies that might qualify, but since we're running out of time, sadly, since everybody here is getting old and need to sleep to live.
I was born in 1983, Brandon.
There's a
I'm sorry to hear that.
I mean, Paul's the oldest of all of us, but that is true.
That's
because
not true.
I'm pretty sure that Trish was not born before the Roman Empire existed. Because I've asked,
how do you know?
I've asked Trish, and Trish's memory ends at the foundation of the Catholic Church. So,
cool.
So,
okay.
Paul, you know I know your history. I know who you really are.
Yeah, I know. That's
Emperor Trajan.
Good.
Anyway, if you don't know who Emperor Trajan is, Mom, Google it real quick. You'll see a bust, and you'll realize it's Paul. Because he looks suspiciously like Emperor Trajan. It's amazing. You could have looked like Nero. I'm just saying.
That would be a terrible answer.
Well, anyway, let's start the process of closing it out here. So we'll stay a little bit after for the folks in the chat just to kind of do a proper closeout on Twitch. But for the show proper, this is kind of the end of that show. So a couple of things. If you'd like to let us know what you thought about this, obviously you can yell it in chat if you like. But if you're at home, you can go to skiffingandfanty.com/listener suggestions and send thoughts. If you have any opinions about the things we covered, that's a great way to send it to us, and we can cover it in a future episode of this show. You can also send us topic suggestions and questions that you'd like us to answer, or things happening in the community you'd like us to cover, because this is somewhat of a current events show, so we always want to try to keep up on things, and we're humans. We can't keep up on it all. So, as for where to follow Skiffing Fanty,
Mostly human.
Mostly human. Are you an AI, Trish?
Awesome.
Are we gonna have a conversation about whether or not you're capable of original thought? Are we gonna do the episode of Star Trek Next Gen where we have to question whether or not you're a person?
We're not doing voight contact tests on Trish. That's just not gonna happen.
Measure of a
Triffid. That's right.
The measure of a Triffid.
Oh goodness. Anyway, so for Skiffing Fanny, you can find us on basically all the social media sites, although we're most active on Mastodon, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And the best way to get to that is actually on the screen for people on Twitch, but at home it's our link tree, which is linktr.ee/skiffingfanty. Please follow us on the places, let folks know where to find us, or don't, and I'll just cry at night. You can also get the newsletter at not newsletter.com. That's a totally different thing. skiffyandfanty.com/newsletter, which is run by Stephen Geigen Miller, who's lovely. And if you do like this show, what we do, there are two things you can do. The live shows, you can let people know that we have a Twitch channel at twitch.tv/skiffyandfanty, which we do Torture Cinema and we do SNF Clacks. Those schedules are right there for people to find. The other thing to do is you can go to our Patreon, which is at patreon.com/skiffyandfanty. You can give us money. We do stuff for money. We sometimes dance like monkeys. It's a thing that we do. Not really. We don't really do that part, but it would be fun if we did that. Honestly, if you give me $5,000, I'll dance like a monkey for you. Like, go for it. The other thing to do is please give us reviews on iTunes. Other sites are also useful, like Podchaser and Good Pods HQ. But iTunes is the big one, so at the very least do that. We're trying to get to those 50 reviews, so please do that. Anyway, for me, I'm at SeanDuke.net. Alphabet streams on Twitch, and I stream on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7 Central. In fact, Paul is often there. Sometimes Brandon is there. I'm also at patreon.com/thejoyfactory, and I'm also on lots of social sites like Twitter and Mastodon, Instagram, etc. You can find all that at linktree/SeanDuke. That's linktr.ee/SeanDuke. And then I'm also doing a fun project called The Histories, which my mom can give me $10 for, so I can write one for her. Go to SeanDuke.net/thehistories, or don't. It's up to you.
You can find me, Brandon O'Brien, on Twitter, Instagram, and on Twitch at The Rising Tides. That's TITHES. My newsletter at brandonobrien.xyz, and over on the podcast Speculate, which you can find at speculatesf.com, where I am presently playing as a character, as a play character in the actual play series Court of Blades, Valorword.
And you can find me, Paul Weimer, across the internet as Prince Justin, from book reviews to streaming to sharing photography and more. And I have an article coming in the next issue of Apex.
And you can find me, Tricia M, at on Twitter at PE Matson, on Mastodon at Tricia M at newsy.social, and I occasionally blog at whatsthewordnow.blogspot.com.
Oh, I put the wrong thing there. Sorry, that wasn't supposed to go there. Okay. Perfect. Oh no, I still need that up, so now people can see my annoying script file. You're welcome. Oh no, they can't see it. Haha! I fixed it. Awesome. Well,
they
thanks so
cannot see
much. So great. I gotta make it awkward because that's required by law. No, that's required by the Skiffy Fanny bylaws that we all signed.
It's in the bylaws.
Section 15, paragraph 2, line 6. Oh,
no,
section
11.
I'm very sorry,
4.
Paul. That's right. Paul wrote them for us, so he would know them because he knows all about it. You can always come, Brandon, to the meetings. The Skiffian Fanty business meeting, which is led by Robert's Rules of Order. But yeah. Okay.
I'll be sick that day. Whatever day it is, I'll be sick.
Who wrote them in Latin, Carturo asks?
Robert's Rules of Order, all of my limbs will be broken.
Well, in any case, yeah, I'm gonna go send my mom videos of me dancing like a monkey just to make it feel very strange for her because, fuck it, Mom. I don't care. You're high on really good painkillers right now, so it's gonna be a weird experience for you. You're welcome. So, anyway, on that note, awkward ending and scene. If you want to support this show, you can go to patreon.com/SkiffyandFanty or SkiffyandFanty.com, our website, where you can get access to all of our fancy things. Our music comes from Holy Mole. You can support him and his work at patreon.com/HolyMole. Thank you for listening.